Welcome, everyone. You're tuned in to the Regenesis Health Podcast, Unconventional Paths to Wellness and Root Cause Healing. I'm James.
And I'm Meredith. We're so glad you could join us today. We are indeed. So today we're going to uncover some, really surprising connections happening inside your body.
Yeah, we'll be looking at how different systems, ones we often think of as separate, are actually, working together in these fascinating ways, sometimes challenging ways, too.
Exactly. And our focus is on how one key area of your health might be impacting your overall wellness, maybe even things like stubborn abdominal weight gain, in ways you probably haven't considered. Our goal, like always, is to bring you clarity and empower you with knowledge. So let's just jump right in.
Okay, so many listeners probably know the biliary system, liver, gallbladder, bile ducts, mostly for its role in digestion, breaking down fats, right? That emulsification part is pretty well known. But it seems like there's so much more to it, this deeper systemic influence. What's the bigger picture? Is it really like a conductor for other things?
That's a perfect way to put it, actually. Yes, the digestive function is vital, absolutely. But the biliary system is, it's a central regulator for a lot more. Think of it coordinating lipid metabolism, cholesterol balance, even inflammatory signals throughout the body. It's quite sophisticated.
Wow. Okay, so before we dive into the problems, maybe walk us through the normal process. How does the body make bile and what's actually in it?
Certainly. So bile is primarily made in the liver, and it's actually synthesized from cholesterol. This is, in fact, the main way your body gets rid of excess cholesterol. And the bile itself, it's this complex fluid, mostly bile acids, phospholipids, and cholesterol. But the ratio is critical. That specific balance keeps the cholesterol dissolved and helps prevent things like gallstones.
Okay, and the gallbladder, often just seen as a storage bag. What's its specific job here? Is it more active than we think?
Oh, definitely. It's more than just passive storage. It stores the bile the liver makes between meals, but it also concentrates it, making it, much more potent. Then when you eat, particularly fats, a hormone called CCK gives it the signal to contract and release that concentrated bile right into the small intestine just when it's needed for good digestion.
That timing is key. But what I find really incredible is the recycling system. Can you explain that? The enterohepatic circulation. You mentioned it's not just efficient, but also a signaling network.
Yes. It's really an amazing piece of biological engineering. This recycling is called enterohepatic circulation. And get this, over 95% of those bile acids get reabsorbed lower down in the small intestine and sent straight back to the liver to be used again.
95%, wow.
Exactly. It shows how carefully the body conserves this stuff. But beyond just saving resources, this whole loop acts like a signaling network. It tells the liver how much bile to make, helps keep everything in balance. It's quite elegant.
Astonishing efficiency. Okay, so that's when things are working well. But what happens when that flow gets sluggish or blocked? You mentioned cholestasis. That sounds like it could cause ripples far beyond just digestion.
You're absolutely right. Cholestasis, which is basically reduced bile flow, is much more than just, a plumbing problem. When bile doesn't flow properly, these potentially toxic bile components back up in the liver. And these retained bile acids, they can act like detergents, basically damaging the liver cells directly. They can mess up mitochondrial function, lead to a lot of oxidative stress, and even cause programmed cell death. It's serious for the liver tissue.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, I think. Because that damaged liver doesn't just suffer quietly. It actually becomes a source of inflammation for the whole body.
Precisely. That's a crucial point. Those damaged liver cells, they release these things called danger signals. These signals activate the liver's own resident immune cells, especially the Kupffer cells. And that triggers what's essentially a localized cytokine storm. Pro-inflammatory chemicals like TNF-alpha and IL-6 get churned out, which just perpetuates the liver injury.
Right, a local fire.
Exactly. But here's the key part. These inflammatory mediators don't just stay in the liver, they spill over into the general circulation, and that leads to chronic, low-grade inflammation throughout the body. This systemic inflammation can then directly contribute to problems like insulin resistance.
So it's a double whammy, really. Not just maybe less bile for digestion, but also an excess of toxic stuff and inflammatory signals inside the liver and spreading outwards, changing the bile quality itself. That feels like a really vital distinction.
It absolutely is. Grasping that distinction is fundamental to understanding the wider health impacts we're talking about.
Okay, that sets the stage perfectly. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about how our bodies normally handle the fats we eat. It's a complex trip, but pretty efficient when it's all working, right?
Indeed. It's quite a journey. It starts with what we call the luminal phase that's happening inside the gut. When you eat fats, they arrive as these big globules. Bile acids are absolutely essential here for emulsification. They break down those large globules into tiny, tiny droplets.
Increasing the surface area.
Exactly. Massively increases the surface area so the digestive enzymes can actually get to the fat molecules and break them down effectively.
Okay, step one, break them down. What's the next critical role for bile acids then?
Their second key job is forming mixed micelles. You can think of these as tiny, water-soluble little taxicabs. They shuttle the digestive fats and also those important fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, K across the watery layer right up to the intestinal cells so they can be absorbed.
Ah, the transport system.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Without enough good quality bile, that transport, that absorption is severely hampered.
Okay, so the fats get to the intestinal cells. What happens inside those cells? The journey continues there.
It does. That's the cellular phase. Inside the enterocytes, those are the intestinal absorptive cells. The absorbed fatty acids and monoglycerides are quickly reassembled back into triglycerides. Then these triglycerides are carefully packaged into these large lipoprotein particles called chylomicrons.
Chylomicrons, okay.
And these have a specific protein marker, ApoB48, kind of like a shipping label, that's crucial for their structure and transport. And because these chylomicrons are so big, they can't just squeeze into the bloodstream capillaries. They have to enter the lymphatic system first. That's their exclusive entry point.
That's such a critical point. Lymph first, not blood. Okay, so this addresses a common idea. People sometimes talk about unprocessed fats causing issues. But based on what you're saying, if digestion really failed, the fat wouldn't even get absorbed, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's a really insightful question. In severe bile deficiency, fats just pass right through. You get steatorrhea, fatty stools, and often weight loss, not gain. So the idea of truly unprocessed fat circulating isn't really how it works.
So what's the more likely scenario then?
A more subtle and probably more common issue involves what we could call pathologically processed fats. Think about situations with maybe subclinical or chronic biliary insufficiency. Bile quality or quantity isn't optimal. The intestinal cells, the enterocytes, they get stressed during absorption. They still process the fats, technically, but they might produce abnormal chylomicrons.
Abnormal how?
Maybe larger than usual, overly packed with triglycerides, and potentially carrying pro-inflammatory signals. It's these altered but still processed fats that then become a problem for the lymphatic system they enter.
Ah, okay, that makes a lot more sense. Pathologically processed. And that leads us right into the lymphatic system itself, the intestinal lymphatics. You called it the exclusive superhighway for these fats. It feels like a system that doesn't get enough attention.
It really doesn't, considering its importance. Inside the villi, those little finger-like projections in the small intestine, you have specialized lymphatic capillaries called lacteals. They have these unique button-like junctions. They function like one-way doors, basically letting large particles like chylomicrons enter easily from the surrounding space, but preventing them from leaking back out.
And that milky fluid people sometimes hear about after a fatty meal.
That's chyle, C-H-Y-L-E.
It looks milky precisely because it's loaded with all those newly formed chylomicrons. And unlike our blood circulatory system, which has the heart pumping away, the lymph doesn't have a central pump.
Right. So how does it move?
It relies on the intrinsic contractions of the lymphatic vessels themselves, kind of like squeezing, and also on external forces, muscle contractions, the movement of your intestines, and importantly, your breathing. Deep breathing really helps move lymph.
Okay, interesting. Now, people often use the term thickened lymph or lymphatic congestion. Can we translate that? What's actually happening physiologically when lymph gets, thickened?
Yeah, that's a common term, and it points to a few things happening scientifically. First, viscosity. A really high influx of chylomicrons can physically increase the viscosity of the chyle. Like adding too much flour to water, it can slow down the flow. Second, you can just have an increased particle load. If there's chronic excess fat intake, the system gets overwhelmed with just too many or maybe too large chylomicrons. It's a state of lipid overload.
So a traffic jam, basically.
Kind of, yes. And third, inflammation plays a role. The lymph fluid itself can become more inflammatory. It might contain more immune cells, more inflammatory cytokines. This can lead to fluid stasis, that feeling of congestion.
And can this overload actually damage the vessels?
Yes, there's solid evidence for something called lipotoxicity-induced lymphangiopathy. Chronic high-fat conditions can physically damage the lymphatic vessels. They can dilate, lose their ability to pump effectively, and crucially, they can become leaky.
Leaky lymphatics.
Exactly. The junctions between the cells weaken, allowing that lipid-rich, potentially inflammatory chyle to actually spill out into the tissues surrounding the lymphatic vessel.
Wow. Okay, so it's a real thing.
Okay.
And you also mentioned the lymphatic system isn't just plumbing, it's involved in immunity. How does that link up with transporting fat?
It's a very important link. As the chyle moves from the intestines, it passes through the mesenteric lymph nodes. Think of these as immune surveillance stations.
Okay.
Now, interestingly, the lipids themselves, carried in those chylomicrons, can act as signals, potentially danger signals, that can trigger an inflammatory response right there in the lymph nodes. This lymph-borne inflammation can then contribute to systemic inflammation, but it also creates a pro-inflammatory environment right there in the mesenteric the fat tissue that directly surrounds these intestinal lymphatics.
Okay, I see the connections forming.
Wait.
So let's really tie this together now. How does a problem starting way back in the biliary system, maybe just subtle insufficiency, directly mess up the lymphatic function? Sounds like a cascade.
It absolutely is a cascade. And again, we're often talking about subclinical biliary issues, not necessarily a complete blockage. When the liver is stressed, maybe inflamed, and produces poor quality bile, maybe the composition is off these days. The intestinal cells get stressed trying to absorb fats with this suboptimal bile.
Right.
And that stress leads them to produce those pathologically altered pro-inflammatory chylomicrons we talked about.
And those are the troublemakers for the lymphatics.
They really are. When these abnormal chylomicrons enter the lacules, they cause problems on multiple levels. There's the mechanical stress, just their volume, maybe their larger size, physically strains and stretches the lymphatic vessels, making it harder for them to pump effectively. Then there's the inflammatory activation. The abnormal lipids themselves can trigger inflammation in the lining of the lymphatic vessels, the endothelial cells, making them pro-inflammatory. Plus, they provoke stronger immune responses in those mesenteric lymph nodes.
And that leads to the leakiness.
Yes. This inflammation weakens the junctions between the lymphatic endothelial cells, making the vessels pathologically leaky. So now you have this lipid-rich inflammatory fluid seeping out.
It really sounds like a two-hit situation then.
Yeah.
The lymphatics are getting hit from multiple angles.
That's a great way to think about it. They're being attacked from the inside by these problematic chylomicrons flowing through them, and potentially from the outside by those systemic inflammatory signals like TNF-alpha and IL-6 that spilled over from the struggling cholestatic liver in the first place. This double assault really ramps up the lymphatic dysfunction. So you see, the link isn't just unprocessed fat equals lymph problems. It's much more complex. Pathologically processed fats meeting systemic inflammation leads to lymphatic failure.
This is all painting a very clear picture, and it leads us directly to something many people struggle with, abdominal weight gain. But you made a point earlier, not all fat is the same. We need to focus on visceral adipose tissue, or VAT.
Yes, that distinction is absolutely critical. VAT, visceral adipose tissue, is the fat stored deep inside the abdominal cavity, packed around your organs, liver, intestines, pancreas. It's very different from subcutaneous fat, the stuff you can pinch under your skin. VAT is more heavily supplied with blood vessels, it contains a lot more immune cells, it's much more metabolically active, and unfortunately, it tends to be more insulin resistant.
And why is having too much VAT such a red flag for health?
Because it's not just inert storage, it's a dynamic endocrine organ and a major source of inflammation. Excess VAT is strongly linked to metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, heart disease. It actively pumps out pro-inflammatory cytokines and releases free fatty acids directly into the portal vein, which goes straight to the liver. So it constantly bombards the liver with inflammatory and metabolic stress.
Okay, so how does the leaky lymphatic issue we just dissected fit into this picture? How does that contribute to building up this specific type of abdominal fat? This feels like the convergence point.
It really is where these pathways collide, with significant consequences. That chronic leakage of remember, it's full of those inflammatory chylomicrons and cytokines spilling out directly into the mesenteric adipose tissue, that tissue right around the gut lymphatics.
Yeah.
It creates a toxic pro-inflammatory microenvironment right there.
And that directly fuels the growth of that visceral fat. It makes it expand.
Yes, precisely. It drives VAT expansion and dysfunction in several ways. First, adipocyte hypertrophy. The fat cells, adipocytes, get a direct supply of lipids from the leaky lymphatics, causing them to swell and get bigger. Second, inflammatory recruitment. Those leaked inflammatory molecules attract more immune cells into the fat tissue. This leads to adipoinflammation. You can even see these crown-like structures under a microscope where immune cells surround dying fat cells, a hallmark of unhealthy fat.
Wow.
And third, chronic inflammation triggers fibrosis. Scar tissue builds up within the fat, making it stiff, dysfunctional, and even more inflamed.
So the abdominal weight gain people notice is, in this context, a physical sign of this deep inflammation and remodeling of the visceral fat, kicked off by the leaky lymphatics.
Exactly. It's a manifestation of that underlying pathology, lymphatic failure, leading to VAT-seat inflammation.
And it sounds like it becomes a truly vicious cycle. Once that VAT is inflamed and dysfunctional, how does it feed back and make the original problems even worse?
It absolutely does. It becomes a self-perpetuating loop. This inflamed VA sends signals back upstream. You have the VA-to-liver crosstalk. As we mentioned, it releases inflammatory factors and fatty acids straight to the liver via the portal vein. This adds more stress to the liver, likely worsening bile production and flow, making that initial biliary issue worse.
Making the bile quality even poorer.
Potentially, yes. And then there's the VAT to lymphatic crosstalk. The enlarged, inflamed fat tissue can physically compress the new bilymphatic vessels, further hindering lymph flow. Plus, the inflammatory factors released by the VAT can directly damage the lymphatic vessels too, increasing their leakiness.
So it just keeps spiraling.
Precisely. It highlights how an initial trigger, maybe even mild biliary sluggishness, can set off this destructive network where liver stress, gut lymphatic failure, and visceral fat inflammation all reinforce each other. Understanding the key players, the cells, the molecules at each point is what allows us to see where we can intervene.
Okay, hearing all that laid out, it could feel a bit daunting. But the flip side is, understanding this intricate, interconnected system actually gives us power, right? It opens up new strategies for intervention. How can we start to break this cycle? It sounds like it needs an integrated approach.
That's absolutely the empowering perspective. Knowing how these systems interact means we can target interventions more effectively, using a multi-pronged strategy to restore balance. So first, we can target the biliary axis itself. Things like TUDCA, that's a specific type of bile acid. A hydrophilic one can help improve bile flow and reduce stress on the liver cells. There are also supportive botanicals. Milk thistle, artichoke extract, dandelion root. These have a long history of use for liver support and promoting healthy bile movement.
What about nutrition?
Foundational nutrition is key. Amino acids like taurine and glycine are needed to synthesize bile acids. Good hydration is essential. And nutrients that support liver detox pathways are important things like sulfur compounds from garlic and cruciferous veggies and antioxidants.
Okay, so supporting the liver and bile is step one. What about downstream, optimizing the actual digestion and absorption part in the gut?
Yes, optimizing digestive and absorptive processes is critical too. Certain types of soluble fiber, think psyllium husk, beta-glucans from oats, glucomannan, can actually bind to bile acids in the gut.
And that helps.
It does, because it encourages the liver to pull cholesterol from the blood to make new, fresh bile, potentially improving its quality. Digestive enzymes, especially pancreatic lipase for fat breakdown, can also be really helpful, taking the strain off the system. And just being mindful of meal composition and timing, maybe avoiding huge, overwhelming high-fat meals that flood the system all at once.
Makes sense. And then for that crucial lymphatic system, the one without its own pump, what can we actively do to support its function and flow?
Right. Supporting lymphatic function and flow is vital, and movement is probably the biggest thing here. Since it relies on external forces, activity like brisk walking, swimming, yoga, even rebounding on a mini trampoline can be great.
And breathing.
Especially deep diaphragmatic breathing. That movement of the diaphragm acts like a pump for the major lymphatic vessels in the torso. Manual lymphatic drainage, MLD, done by a trained therapist, can also provide specific support.
Any nutritional support for the vessels themselves?
Yes, some research points to bioflavonoids like diosmin and hesperidin potentially helping to improve the tone and integrity of lymphatic vessels, maybe reducing that leakiness we discussed.
Okay, good to know. And finally, tackling that metabolically active visceral fat. How do we calm down the inflammation there and stop it from driving the cycle?
Exactly. Mitigating visceral adipose tissue inflammation is the final piece. This really comes down to powerful anti-inflammatory lifestyle strategies. diet is huge.
Yeah.
Focusing on omega-3 fatty acids from sources like fatty fish, loading up on polyphenols from a wide variety of colorful fruits and vegetables, green tea, maybe turmeric. Managing insulin resistance is also crucial here. That means reducing refined carbohydrates and sugars, ensuring adequate protein intake.
And exercise.
Exercise is incredibly powerful. It not only helps reduce VAT directly, but also has potent systemic anti-inflammatory effects. It helps improve insulin sensitivity, too. It hits multiple points in this cycle. So, you see, it really is about an integrated approach. True, lasting health improvements often come from addressing all these connected parts, supporting bile, optimizing digestion, moving lymph, and calming visceral fat inflammation. That's how you can effectively halt that vicious cycle and nudge the body back towards metabolic balance. It's empowering to realize that even complex pictures like this have actionable solutions when we understand the root connections.
This podcast is not affiliated with the authors of the books, sources, or the concepts mentioned. We do not endorse claims within these books or sources. We are legally required to advise listeners to consult their doctors or a qualified healthcare professional before attempting any cleanse or making significant changes to their health regimen. What may work for one person may not be suitable or safe for another. Thank you so much to all the listeners for being here today, and we look forward to sharing this time with you again soon.